morning, everyone. Just wanted to let you know that this is my very first podcast. And would you believe I have just realized that I have been talking into the microphone my wonderful son Philip bought me for the last 15 minutes and had forgot to turn my computer on. So there you go. That's how experienced I am at this. Um, It hasn't been written down. I haven't set bullet points. I've probably done it the way I do everything, I suppose, my own way. And I'm just going to speak from the heart and the head and just get on with it. Um, you may wonder why I've decided now. My son said to me, Mum, you should really start doing a podcast. And for many, many years now, I've always wanted to write a book just about my life and my experiences and things like that. Mainly for a cathartic reason to try and get it all out of my own head and to see if that would help me in my journey of finding some kind of peace within my mind. Um, and I have pages, I have some, stuff that I've written on my computer. I have pages and folders and all the rest of it. And it's never been a problem to have information to put out there that I want to write out of my head and my heart. The problem is finding the first line. And I found that quite difficult actually just sitting here. I'd done all my talk and then I looked at my computer and realized I hadn't done anything at all. So, here we go. Um, So my name is Caroline Sacramento, and before that, it was Spence. Um, and my podcast is just going to be about me, about my teaching life, about my personal life, and just about life in general. My aim is that somewhere in among all that, there may be something that will help you to put one foot in front of the other on a daily basis and just get yourself through life when you're having hard times, and maybe just, you know, help you to understand a little bit more about my teaching life regarding Pilates and fitness and well-being and things like that. And I don't have all the answers. I'm just like everybody else that I teach in front of me. I'm not the perfect size. I'm not the perfect weight. I like things that, everybody likes, that we all know. There's no magic trick, folks. Remember that my podcast is my opinion. I cast nothing on anybody else. And I'd just like to say that from the word go. But I will speak about my experiences on a personal basis. Um, I can't say that my podcast might not be sad at times, but I suppose we all have sadness in our life. So we can't I've spent my whole life burying it away deep down in myself and never really faced it. Um, but I find that as the years roll on, I have always been a very empathetic person, even as a young girl, mainly, I suppose, because my own brother from a young age, he was born with a terminal illness. There was 4 years between us, and he died when he was 10. Um, so I've always known personally what it felt like to be the sibling of somebody that other people talked about or poked fun at or whatever the case may be. He suffered a lot through his condition with eczema, which was a side aspect of it. And of course, it was visual. And anybody who has children or anyone in the family with eczema will know that's an extremely, extremely horrible condition at times, to the point where the skin gets so dry that it cracks, especially in the fingers, the wrists, the elbows, the back of the knees, and it will break and bleed. And that's just, the truth of it all. So from a young girl, I always remember just feeling very sad for other people. And that has remained. So I may talk about things that will maybe open some of those doors. I can't say whether that will happen or whether it won't, as this is a new experience to me. But if it's not for you, that's fine. There are apparently lots of podcasts out there. I just never have really had the time to listen to any. But I hope those of you that do will find something out there. Um, in my teaching life, I don't have a lot of time to talk to the people who come to me. We have the general, how are you? Good morning. And then someone else will come to ask a question. And I always feel that maybe the person that I was speaking to first feels that I sort of moved away and didn't finish my conversation with them. So this is a way for you to be able to listen to me. Um, on a personal basis. I'm talking to you, and then you are more than welcome when this goes up or it goes out or whatever, whatever's done with it, that you can come back to me and ask me questions if there's anything I can help you with, anything you're not sure about, whether it's, just general down things or whether it's about grief or whether it's about classes or fitness or whatever it might be. I'm more than happy to chat to you about that. Um, I was born in London, and I remember my mum and dad, um, where we lived, on a Friday when dad got paid. He used to take me as a toddler now, because I left London when I was about 4. He used to take me by the hand. And I always remember, to me at that time, he had these massive big hands. And he was my savior. If my father had have asked me to jump off the top of a roof and told me he would catch me, I believed he would catch me. And I still think if he said it today, if he was alive, I might still take the chance and jump, although it'd be a bit heavier for him to catch. But we used to go across the road, and we used to go to the fish and chip shop, which I suppose half the world do and still do. And dad's favourite was a pickled egg, yuck for some, and mum's was one of those big thick gherkins, which were very, very popular in London in the fish and chip shops then. And daddy used to buy me a little bag of gold, it used to be called. I think you can still get it now in those old fashioned sweet shops where they sell all those different sweets from days back. And they were just little pieces of yellow chewing gum, but it looked like, fool's gold. And outside that shop, there was a little, like a little boy, a life size, and he had a caliper on his leg. So a caliper is like an instrument or piece of equipment that goes on the leg of somebody who maybe had issues with their movements of their legs, to help them, to strengthen them and allow them to walk in a more straight way. And daddy always used to throw some money into that. And I always remember you could see it running down and it would fall into the base of it. That's one of my biggest memories of my childhood. We had a dog who was a beautiful red golden retriever called Rusty. Well, that dark goldy color, you don't get them so much that color now. They're sort of honey blonde colors now, and nice, nice memory. Not a lot of them, because I suppose I was young, but those are the ones that stuck in my mind. And then obviously they came over to live in Northern Ireland. My granny and aunt lived down in Portstewart, so um, what brought mummy closer to her own family, which she always wanted to be. She'd always been in hospitality, had worked from she was about 7 years old, I think, picking potatoes on the farm. And then I suppose there wasn't an awful lot to do down around Portstewart and Portrush at that time, other than hospitality work, which mummy then went into, and then continued to work in Edinburgh, London, all over Northern Ireland, and down south also. So when they came over, they bought a guest house, and unfortunately, Daddy was a master plasterer and was always used to working in London or Edinburgh, which is where he was born, actually, on the same street as Sean Connery. That's my claim to fame. Obviously, Sean Connery went in one direction and my dad went in the other, but they broke up when I was about 6, and that, I have to say, had a tremendous effect on the rest of my life. And in many ways broke me as a, you know, my faith in other people, my belief in other people. I've always found it very, very difficult. And, but that's the way it went. My dad always said he loved me. He used to call me Snowball. But the most I ever got really was a phone call. I think my mum was awarded 5p, or a shilling it was then, um, by court for to help look after me. Isn't that wonderful? A shilling. Um, but they went their separate ways, and Mum has always been a great worker, and she ran her little guest house because that was all she knew to do, if you know what I mean, because all her working life had been in that environment. And it was wonderful all those years back. The guest houses in Bangor used to be very, very busy with Scottish um, people over, English people from Ireland. And you did used to get some people from Europe, but not as much. And as you would now, of course. But then there's easier ways to travel, I suppose. And then, of course, the Troubles started, and that changed everything. People didn't come on holidays anymore. So it was very hard to make a living in that kind of a business. And people have this romantic notion of running a guest house or a bed and breakfast. It's lovely. Yes, it's lovely. It was my mother's life. It was everything to her, until, of course, she was forced into an early retirement because of the Queen's Parade development and having to force sell her property. And I lived 2 doors down from Mummy as well, so we were more or less forced to sell our houses because of their development. And here we are 8 years later, and the houses are still sitting there and the development still hasn't been done. And that's only 8 years from we have moved house. But that had been going on way back in 2021 when it was first, sorry, 2001, when my son was away for his bone marrow transplant. And we first realised then that they had decided they were going to incorporate those 4 houses into that development. And maybe 15, 20 years before that, when they put the people out of King Street. Um, so that was terrible. I mean, that was just the worst thing, because my mother would have stayed working in, the line of business she was in until she dropped dead. She always said that, and still walks down by the house to see it, and still feels sad, and would still buy it back if it was available to buy. I mean, she'd just be happy that they would knock it down now. Her biggest fear is that somebody else will be allowed to go in and live in it. Um, and my mum is a wonderful lady. Um, Growing up, we had chickens and hens and a goat, and she's always had this thing about anything or any person that is hungry. I suppose because growing up in post-war years, she was probably hungry herself, I would have to say. But yes, and still feeds the birds and still feeds anything that comes around near that she thinks looks hungry. Was an extremely, extremely kind person, um, to all that came to stay with her. And it's not that very long ago before we moved that I was walking down the Vennel in Bangor, and a lady was coming up, and Mum had just passed. She was going to the shop with her sister, and the lady called me and she said to me, "Do you know that lady up there?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "That's my mother." And she said, "Well, let me tell you, I was a social worker all my life in Bangor." And she said, "If we hadn't have had your mother, there would have been so many people on the street, because other people didn't want to take them in for various reasons, but Mummy took them in and was happy to take them in because in her life when she was young and lived in London, um, she was married to Daddy and they were over in London and went to get a room in a guest house and or a bed and breakfast. And this is widely known, and I've heard people talk about these things as well. And because she looked younger than 21, they wouldn't take them in. And so mummy and daddy had to go and sleep on newspaper in a park in London. So my mum has never had her trials to seek. My youngest brother, Alan, was born a couple of years before me, and he unfortunately passed away at 18 months on his way to the Great Ormond Street Hospital on my mother's knee in an ambulance. And then, of course, I was born. And then when mummy was over here, my brother Philip was born. And he unfortunately died of the same disease at 10 years of age. Extremely rare disease and not a lot known about it. And over the years, I suppose, because there was only 500 cases in the world whenever I had my children that were born with the same disease. And at that time, there really wasn't an awful lot had changed in the field of medicine regarding it. Maybe in the management of it, but not really in the long term, because the only thing that could save a child's life who had Westcott Aldrich syndrome was a bone marrow transplant. But anyway, uh, so yes. So where did we get to? I was talking about we first moved over. So yes, over the years anyway, I evolved after being a carer for so many years into a exercise to music instructor. So that has been my life very much for the last 25 plus years. And as I was saying, the reason for the podcast was just sort of, people come and ask me questions, and you have a small space of time to speak to somebody or your class before or after. And, lots of people want to chat to you, and then other people maybe are a little bit quieter and don't like to chat in front of somebody else. So, this is a way of you sort of learning a little bit more about me in all walks of life, in my business life, in my, personal life. I would tend to be quite a loner in many ways, and class is always quite surprised about that, because I suppose when you're standing up there and you're leading your class, well, I mean, you have to lead them, you have to encourage them, you have to, you're presenting yourself, and they're always very shocked that I would be quiet and sort of a little bit introverted. But when I look back, um, really, I was like that all my life. You know, I do think now of myself as maybe looking miserable, but I think probably for a lot of time I was, especially with I hated school. I just hated it. I loved music. I loved languages. I loved art. But in school, and I think in a way it's very much today, although things have changed. It was very much, maths and English. I loved English and did very well in English, but I loved music. I loved singing, and we had a lovely singing teacher in both the grammar school that I stayed in for a year, and then went down to um, secondary school in Bangor. Um, Left the grammar school because I never really felt that I fitted in. I just felt lonely there. And then came down to the other school and was bullied for the whole time that I was there. But I was bullied in my primary school as well. I remember a girl who I still see today rammed me up against the coat hangers in the school and took the breath out of me. It was just a horrible experience, you know. And of course, I probably was very miserable because, you know, I was at home living with my brother who was terminally ill. His life was spent a lot in the Royal Victoria Hospital. I mean, there was times when mummy used to have to get um the police used to drive her in because, you know, if she was in a hurry, she couldn't get there in time. There was always a possibility that, you know, horrible things could happen. Um, so I presume I was sad, lonely, miserable. I mean, I was only 14 when my brother died at 10, and you know that was probably bigger thing in my life than I really thought of at that time, because I just remember mummy being so emotionally devastated. But mummy has always been a manager. And because mum and dad had split up when I was 6, she was my mother, my father. She was the bread earner, you know. And when when guests were no longer coming, I mean, mummy went out and worked 2 or 3 jobs, night shift, day shift, you know, she was like that all her life. And never, you know, in that line of business, you didn't make a big lot of money in Bangor because post troubles, there wasn't a lot of people traveling. And even after that, you had spells, you know, where you had people coming. But in the main, it wasn't a big tourist attraction, you know, to come to Bangor. Sadly, I have to say. But yeah, difficult times and lonely times at school. A couple of girls in particular just couldn't stand the sight of me, and wasn't wasn't that many years ago. I was speaking to a girl who I went to school with who told me that one of the fellas in the school had paid her 50p to beat me up. So I don't know what it was. I think a lot of the thinking was that because I had come down from a grammar school, I was a snob. Because I was quiet, I was a snob. The reason I was quiet was because of grief, of loneliness, of sadness, of, you know, one day being a brother and a sister, and the next day just being, you know, an only child. And my brother, I was at home in the house whenever, you know, my aunt came back to tell me that my brother had passed away. So I wasn't there even when he passed. So I suppose all those things as well in a young person's mind, you know, not happy in the school environment I was in anyway, not enjoying the subjects that I did and that were always pushed and are still are pushed, you know. It's always this thing about, well, you need to do maths, you need to do English, you need to be productive in life, you know, to be a success. If you make something, you can be wealthy. If you paint, you know, who wants somebody that can paint? Who wants somebody that can sing? You know, that's the academic minefield in some respects, not everywhere, but in some respects, you know. And yet, at all those other things, you can be successful. And what is success? You know, is successful just shown in the amount of money that you make or the things that you have? Can you be personally successful where you just feel fulfilled inside? And in many respects, the older we get and the more the years go on, we realize that maybe the latter is more important. Of course, we have to pay our bills, we have to eat, and all those other things. Um, but in my life, I was never driven to find the biggest, you know, leisure center or the fanciest club or whatever the case may be. Those things never drove me. I started teaching my classes to the community, um, because that's where I felt I wanted to, you know, put myself, where people who maybe just didn't want to join a gym for whatever reason, nothing to do with finances or anything else, but just didn't particularly like the, you know, the atmosphere or the venues, um and people who didn't have the money to pay memberships for things like that, people who were maybe a little bit like myself, a loner who didn't particularly have friends to go to these places with, you know, and that worry that you have about whether you'll fit in when you go to that class. And we've all been to those kind of classes where they're all very clicky and people look at you as if to say, well, oh, who are you? Especially if you're a newcomer. I've seen that in classes that I've taught myself. I've been in my own classes where you would have, you know, maybe younger people come in looking at the group and then thinking, oh, well, this isn't going to be very hard. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily a good thing to do, especially in a class that I teach, uh, because my classes are easy if you want them to be, and you're always encouraged to work at your own pace, to rest down if you need to. But I am a pusher. None of us are getting any younger. You got to use it or lose it. There's no doubt about it. That's one of the truest sayings regarding well-being and fitness ever. If you do not use your body, those muscles become lax. Everything else is affected by that. And so yeah, so I've always taught outside. I've or taught my own classes first and foremost, and I remain at that now. And I have to say, touchwood, I was very, very lucky, if you want to call it that, that I never had any classes pulled off a timetable. I was never asked to leave. I was never told my numbers weren't good enough. But I was lucky in the respect that I have always been a freestyle group exercise instructor. I never was joined to a specific group where my music was made for me, my routines were made for me, or anything else. Everything comes out of me and my head. And that's the way I could work, even when I was first studying exercise to music and the training of it, where you set your music, you did your chorus and your verse, and that just didn't work for me. It curtailed me. It sort of stopped my ability personally for putting in everything that I wanted to put into my classes. So in many respects, it, it has been wonderful for me to be able to remain freestyle and remain for as long as I did. I mean, I only gave up Arts Leisure in 2016, and that was solely due to the fact that my son had to go back into hospital and have some stents in, and I think I hadn't been feeling very well myself, and I just thought that was the time to go. And it was a very difficult decision for me to make. I wrote a letter to my classes and asked management to please put it on the wall, to let them know. But those who knew me knew that I wouldn't just walk off and leave them, because it had been said that nobody knew where I was and I just hadn't come back. But that was not the case. And those who would have come to my classes would have known that I wouldn't have just walked off and left them in the lurch. I stayed as long as I did because of the people in front of me, not because of any venue. And to this day, it's always about the people that are in front of me. And during COVID, we had to sort of change things around and took classes outside, which I still do now, because the people that have come to me outside, of my own people anyway, so to speak, no longer want to go back inside. It's wonderful for me anyway, because I would be an outside person. I much prefer to be outside than inside. And then just recently have gone back and taken a few classes inside for those that had been waiting for me to go back. So podcast will really be about a lot of all those things, about life in general and what I have experienced in my life. It may not be for everybody, and that's fine. There's plenty of different ones out there. Just like my style of teaching may not be for everybody. I'm sure sometimes I often think when people pass our classes in the park and they hear me shouting out my orders, I'm not shouting out my orders. I teach as well as instruct. So I remember years and years ago being at some exercise to music classes or fitness classes or whatever you want to call them. And you'd be told to pull your belly up, flatten your stomach. And I remember thinking, what does that actually mean? How do you do that? That's all right for somebody that's always had a flat stomach. Personally speaking, I don't recall my stomach being ever completely flat. So I never really understood that. You were shown your routine, you followed your routine. But other than that, you never really got to know what you were working when you were doing certain things. So my style maybe is quite different in that I not only teach the routine, but I also educate the people in front of me to know what we're working, why we're working it, the benefit of working it. And trying to do that in among your class when you're instructing and trying to breathe yourself sometimes is quite challenging, but it is the way I teach. And the people who come to me know that I'm not shouting at them ever. Plus, when you're teaching outside, you're up against the weather, the wind, the trees blowing, the rain if it's raining, and your traffic, which we're quite close to. So you've got to shout. And then, of course, you can't hear yourself um, from a distance, so you don't know. But it's not really shouting. So I'm going to go for now, and I'm just going to say that you will be able to contact me on my website at Fitness by Caroline, on my Facebook page at Caroline's Pilates, and through TikTok. So I hope you've enjoyed this little chat that I've had just to start off with, and enjoy your day. Get through it the best you can. If it's not an enjoyable day for you, keep your heart up. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and take care and look after yourself, and I'll speak to you soon. Lots of love. Bye bye.